कहूंगा, उसके बाद I'll hand over to you, sir. Good evening, friends. This is a landmark year for our nation as India celebrates its 75th year of independence. To commemorate this journey of 75 years of an independent Indian nation, the National Legal Services Authority, NALSA, is holding a pan-India awareness and outreach campaign from 2nd October to 14th November as part of the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav program of the Government of India. The purpose of this awareness and outreach campaign is to reach people residing in all parts of the country, to acquaint them regarding the functioning of the legal services and institutions, and to spread awareness about crucial social legal issues and improve access to justice. Friends, for the purpose of this campaign, we at SAMVAD-NIMHANS are pleased to partner with NALSA and the Karnataka State Legal Services Authority to conduct a public discourse series, Trading Body and Soul, on issues related to child sex trafficking. This is a three-part series which will be conducted in English and Hindi. Today and tomorrow, I will be in conversation with Dr. Virendra Mishra, an IPS officer and former director of the National Institute of Social Defense, and an expert on human trafficking to discuss various aspects and issues related to the problem of child sex trafficking. Today's discussion will be in English, while tomorrow's discussion will be held in Hindi. On 28th October, that is next Wednesday, we will hold a talk on psychosocial and mental health impacts of child sex trafficking in English, and the session in Hindi will be held on 29th October from 5:30 to 7 p.m. This session will discuss the grave mental and psychological impacts which child sex trafficking has on its victims. Then on Monday, 1st November, the third and final part of the series will be held to discuss some of the factors leading to low convictions of perpetrators of child sex trafficking in English, and the session in Hindi will be held on the following day, that is 2nd November, again from 5:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. This session will discuss the various gaps and issues in legal processes which result in the abysmally low conviction rates of child sex trafficking in India. The talk today will be from a moment now for about an hour or so, and then from 6:30 to 7, we will answer questions which you can ask in the comments in the chat section of YouTube. My team will curate it, and I will put these questions to Dr. Mishra. So friends, today we are honored to have with us Dr. Virendra Mishra to discuss various aspects of child sex trafficking. Virendra ji is an IPS officer of Madhya Pradesh and former director of the National Institute of Social Defense. He has also served as the director of the National Service Scheme and as the CEO of the Central Adoption and Resource Authority, that is CARA. As an expert on issues of global human trafficking, he has authored a book on combating human trafficking gaps in policy and laws, and edited and compiled a volume, Human Trafficking, the Stakeholder's Perspective. This is a collection of essays which delve into themes of sexual exploitation, child trafficking, international human trafficking, legal issues, state experiences, and case studies on trafficking. Samvad is pleased to welcome Dr. Virendra Mishra as a speaker to the first session of Trading Body and Soul, a public discourse series on child sex trafficking. Dr. Mishra, a privilege and honor to invite you to share your experiences. Dr. Mishra.
Thank you so much, and good evening to all. So it's a pleasure to be part of such an important discourse where, human trafficking is such a sensitive issue, and what I feel is still a lot needs to be understood about the subject. So, here today we are going to discuss about understanding different aspects of child sex trafficking. So, you know, basically, I would say that I have tried to choose this subject and try to project it as understanding different aspects, because sometimes we get confused, because when we talk about sex trafficking, more or less our understanding revolves around what we see or what we hear in the newspaper and limit ourselves in the understanding. So today we will try to understand the different facets of sex trafficking. So that would be important, because the practitioners or the other people can only I would say that would be able to address the problem if they understand what human trafficking is. So first of all, what we need to understand is, do we believe that human trafficking is an organized crime? That is very important to understand first. So the first question is it an organized crime or not? For that, let us understand the definition next. So in layman's language, whenever a crime is planned and executed with with the help of more than two persons, then, and not necessarily that all the partners in the crime need to know what they are doing. I mean, they could be people connected to each other, but not necessarily know each other. So, but it is for profit and power. So that has been defined as organized crime internationally, and which makes sense. So let us understand what, how the human trafficking operates and what is the definition of human trafficking, which has been accepted globally. And when I say globally, the definition has been given by UN Palermo Protocol, United Nations Palermo Protocol, which held a meeting sometime in 2000 in Palermo, which is in Italy. So a definition was given by them. And the same definition, more or less, I mean, I would say that almost completely the same definition has been adopted by, by India, and which is there placed in Indian Penal Code as Section 370. Next. So, I mean, I haven't written the definition here because definition is too big. I mean, it would have covered, and there is no need to go to the definition per se, like in exactly what is written. So I have tried to break the definition so that it becomes easy for each one of us to understand what exactly it constitutes. So definition can be divided into two types, in two parts. One is what action has been mentioned in the definition, like what action, if taken, then it would constitute as trafficking. It can be interpreted as trafficking. And second is, what is the geospatial situation of the trafficking definition. So when we take about the actions, so what action is required is a victim who is trafficked. So the victim is recruited. Then recruited means the victim has to be picked from somewhere, identified, and then recruited. Then they have to be transferred from one place to another. And during the transfer, they could be harboring, means one place they can break, stay. Then the victim is handed over to some other person who receives it. And that person or some other person then maintains the person, because a person who is victimized is not exploited just for once. I mean, they continue exploitation. So that is why the person has to be maintained. But how did they recruit them? The means adopted for recruitment has to be threat or force, fraud, deception, or abuse of power, or giving or receiving of payments or benefits. So these means are necessary for any action to be considered as trafficking action. But if the purpose is not there in the definition, I mean, what has been given in the definition, if the purpose is not there in that particular crime, so not necessarily that is going to be trafficking. The purpose given in the definition is exploitation for sex, forced labor, organ transplant, and then there is a general term used for other purposes of slavery. So slavery is a very general term that has been used here for the purpose. So here we need to understand for, for the law enforcers or any person who wants to act on human trafficking, that if the purpose is not there in that particular action, then it may constitute or it may be interpreted as a different crime. So like, let me give you an example. A kidnapping in itself does not become human trafficking, or like, abduction. It is not human trafficking. Rape is not human trafficking. There may be like, the action may be same. They may be recruited, they may be transported, harbored, received by a person. Threat can be used. But if it is not an exploitation for sex, if it is one action, one time, like, they just, the rape is there, then in that case, it is not trafficking. If the exploitation for, they are recruited and, the means are used, or these means, and then they are like, exploited continuously, then it becomes human trafficking. So this is what we need to understand. That is what, basically, differentiates between section 370 and 376. If we put the, like, a sexual offense here. So that is the difference between section 370 and section 376. That is a very important thing that we need to understand. Why an action becomes human trafficking, the other one does not constitute human trafficking. Next. Yeah, so this is the spatial, breakup of the definition. We said in the action, a person has to be recruited. The place where the person is recruited is called a place of origin. Means a trafficker would come and they would come and recruit them. So for recruitment, the means which I have been already told, like using of force, deception, fraud, means like, of money buying or whatever is used as given in the definition, that happens at the point of origin. Then there is transfer, transport as it was given, then that is called the transit. That is spatial, means they move from one place to another. And the last one is destination, where the person is received and maintained for exploitation. So this is not, there is a change of place. So that is why we say that there is a spatial change in places. And another thing which we need to understand is there is always chances of interchangeability of the phases in space description, because the traffickers are so smart and because they invest in recruitment. So that is why a destination point can become a place of origin for the next, a trafficking purpose. So after, like, that the destination, from there another trafficker can come and buy it from the other trafficker, and that becomes the point of origin, and the next place becomes the point of destination. So now if we see these, like, from both the earlier slide and this slide, we see that it is not possible for everything to be done by one person. So always it has to be like, more than one person involvement. So if there are more than two persons involvement, it becomes an organized crime. It is a huge money spinning organized crime. And UN says that, like, out of the three most spinning organized crimes, one is the drugs, the second is weapon trafficking, and the third is human trafficking. And there is always debate going on, like if human trafficking is third or it can be first or second, because hardly we know about human trafficking. Even the definition is very limited. So we'll talk about the definition sometime else, but here we are focusing just on child sex trafficking. Now, why, in case of the, a child, the definitions very clearly says that any person who is less than 18 years, then even if the child gives consent, then that is considered to be null and void. So it becomes a case of trafficking. Next, please. Normally, if we talk about human trafficking as per the definition, it is like, it involves commercial sexual exploitation, as we call it sex trafficking. The second is forced labor. Third is, here we have talked about organ transplant, but I talk about medical trafficking because there are many things which are not part of the definition but needs to be included. Perhaps in the coming bill, if you read the bill, there are so many things which have been included, and India has been leading it by including other aspects of or dimensions of trafficking. So medical trafficking is one, and adoption trafficking, which we don't talk about at all. So that is like, again, one of the purposes of trafficking. So, but today we are going to focus on commercial sexual exploitation. The TIP, TIHB, and HT means in US it is called trafficking in persons, and Indian law also now talks about trafficking in persons, because earlier we used to talk about only human trafficking, but we need to understand these, like, nomenclatures. It would be easy. So TIP, it means trafficking in persons. TIHB is a term used in European countries, that is called trafficking in human beings, and HT, of course, is human trafficking. Next, please. So we are today now focusing on child sex trafficking. So first, while talking about child sex trafficking, first thing I would like you to understand is that sex trafficking is not a very simple subject as we normally, like, by generalizing the term, we understand it. So commonly, like, if we talk about sex trafficking, and what I have been doing, like, since more than a decade that I've been working in this field. So, like, when you talk to people, they would immediately presume that sex trafficking means a girl is being sold for sex, and it's a brothel type of condition. So that is why we need to understand what are the different dimensions or different aspects of sex trafficking. Unless and until we understand that, it would be difficult for us to address that issue. And particularly for the law enforcers, it is very important that we understand what are the different aspects of sex trafficking. As I said, any person less than 18, if they are being, like, even if they give consent, it does not matter. It is not considered to be, a consent, and that becomes null and void. Next, please. So one important question here is, who are victims of trafficking? That's very important to understand. Like, are all children, like, can be trafficked? Or is it like, or if at all, so they can be trafficked, then why they are not being trafficked? That's an important question. A generalized opinion, I mean, is that the poverty is one of the causes of trafficking, human trafficking. But why not all poor people get trafficked, or all poor kids get trafficked? That's a big question. Next. So only those people who are vulnerable are victims of trafficking. Traffickers are very, very smart. The traffickers would pounce on a person whose vulnerability they think they can exploit easily. So they keep on looking for vulnerable people. In the same conditions, one child, if the support system is good, if they have a protection net, then even if they are poor, then they won't be, like, the trafficker won't get into that place. So because there is a danger of being caught. So they always keep on scouting for kids who are vulnerable, who are left aside. So this is one thing which is important, that we need to, this term has to be understood, because this term is what is going to save us in future if we understand what causes vulnerability. Next, please. So let us come to, like, what are the different forms of sexual exploitation that we are talking about, commercial sexual exploitation of a child. One thing which is very well understood, I mean, that is one thing which flashes immediately in our mind is, if a child is prostituted. So prostituted where? Means a child is found in brothels. That is one place where exploitation happens, and quite often. And the problem is, like, that is so close community, the prostitutes, the brothels, normally it is so well guarded by the pimps or by a strong caucus or network of people there, the criminals, that it becomes very difficult to rescue, and even to come to know about that, if the children are victim, they've been prostituted there or not. It is very important to understand that prostitution, though a child, normally what we have found in studies is that here is where the definition which is given in 370 or the Palermo Protocol definition, where there is a huge gap which needs now to be, like, bridged, and that is what this law is going to talk about, the current law. And what that is that in the definition 370 you will see, and what I have put it in spatial definition as well, that transit is one component which is mandatory. I mean, which has to be part and parcel of the definition of, I mean, a part of action for an action to be considered as human trafficking. So transit means transfer, transportation, harboring, and everything. So let us presume a condition. Let us say that, okay, one lady has been trafficked and she's in a brothel. And then she's she bears a child and she's a girl child and she grows. And as a child, the owner of the brothel or the pimps prostitute her. That child is prostituted, and which is a very, very common feature and which happens very often because the inroads of the other sections are so less in the brothels that normally it is overlooked. So if in that condition, this child has been sexually exploited, but it may not fit into the definition of trafficking if strictly we adhere to what the definition of trafficking says, because there is no transport or transfer. So that is why it was required, because when the definition was given in way back in 2000 in Palermo Protocol, so at those days it was presumed that the developing countries are point of origin and the developed countries are point of destination. So what they thought is the victims are coming from developing countries and they have to be transported. It means there has to be a cross-border movement, and then they are victimized in developed countries. So that is why there was a lot of emphasis given on the transport and transfer. So when the Westerners, when they planned or when they defined this, gave definition of human trafficking, in their mind, it was very clear that they are talking about cross-border trafficking. But now if you see, domestic trafficking is a bigger, it's a bigger issue than cross-border trafficking now. So, but here also in domestic trafficking also, in most of the cases, the transfer and transport is there, but there is a situation where there won't be any transport. I mean, the child who has been born in one place, in one building, maybe in one room, at the same place, the child may be prostituted or may be trafficked, or she can be sexually exploited. So that is why the definition needs to be changed. And thankfully, in this bill, in the trafficking definition, this has been added that transport or transfer is not necessary. So, and some Western, European countries also have added that in the definition or in their laws. So this is one thing which is very important. So getting prostituted, I mean, getting to the children being sent to brothels is important to understand, that's one of the biggest form of child sex trafficking, sexual exploitation. And why children? That again, there is a lot of myth associated with that, because it is said that if somebody establishes or gets intimate with a child, many sexually transmitted diseases are cured. That is a myth which has been developed, and many people try to buy the girls just because of that. So that is how they want to exploit the girls. I mean the young girls. And besides that, that there are many other reasons as well. So prostituted. Let us come to the other second form of trafficking, which is community-based sexual exploitation. So this is one area where hardly any work is being done. Many people must have heard about DNTs, denotified tribes. So there were many tribes which, as per the 1871 Act, Criminal Tribes Act, were put into criminal tribes, considered to be criminal tribes, and they were treated as criminals. Some of those communities are Bedia, Bachra, Nat, Kanjar, Sasi, Perna. These are some of the tribes, not exactly tribes, but they are now considered to be scheduled caste in many places. So the problem with community-based sexual exploitation is that these communities like Bedia, Bachra, and many other communities, they have got into generational prostitution, intergenerational prostitution. So if you track down, you can figure out for 4-5 generations in a family, the girl is being prostituted. And the worst part is, why do we call it trafficking? Because the girls are pushed into prostitution, or they are though they claim that they are giving choice and option for the girls to either get married or basically get into sex work. But actually that option is not there for a 12 years 13-year-old girl. It is very difficult for her to decide, because what she sees in the community is the glamour associated with getting into sex work, because they think they are earning, the other community members do not earn. The stigma associated with these communities is so strong that the other forms of livelihood is almost non-existent. Like if I talk about Bedia community, when we did a study with Bedia community and we are working with the community, so we found in a village that for last 30 years, there was not a single man who had gone to work outside, or he had not looked for any employment. They were totally banking on exploitation of the girls. And they, being brothers, used to be the pimps. The mother are pimps and other people are pimps. So here the girls, 12, 13-year-old girls, are pushed into prostitution. So this is again a big problem, community-based sexual exploitation. But it is so normalized, in the community, because they have been seeing for generations that this is happening. So what they would do is they would just stigmatize them, marginalize them, the neighboring communities, but won't take any action or won't work with them to ensure that they get out of it. And unfortunately, even the state has been very liberal with them, and they think
it's 6 o'clock.
They think that it is like one thing which happens with them, so they would just ignore. And the state would give run many programs for them, but they do not work very strongly to ensure that the girls are not put into trafficking or prostituted. So community-based sexual exploitation is one area where a lot needs to be done, and it is totally neglected area. Then sex tourism. Sex tourism is again a big market for child trafficking. In India, Goa, Kerala, which are like tourism hubs, have become place where the kids are exploited a lot. But not only this sex tourism happens in these places. When they say that Super Bowl is one of the biggest games happening in USA, there they say that it runs into millions and millions of dollars of sex industry. And most of them are children who are being exploited there. So wherever big games happen, there the exploitation of children is a lot. There was there were some reports saying that when this thing Asia happened in Delhi, so many girls, young girls and even young boys, in fact, when we're talking about children, we are not just talking about the girls. I mean, even the boys, they were moved to Delhi and in neighboring places for sex tourism. So this is one area again which normally we just overlook. Don't focus much on this. So and the worst part of sex tourism is many a times the sex tourism happens with acceptance of the parents. It could be poverty, it could be any reason. So they are they are basically traded for sex most of the time by parents or by filial relations. So that is again a big problem for sex tourism. The chances of complaint is very less. Now coming to another form of trafficking is bride trafficking, that is forced marriage. Bride trafficking, in some communities, there are skewed sex ratios. And in skewed sex ratio, the males are not finding girls in their own community. Or maybe another, dimension is that the women are there, but because of less availability of females for marriage in the community, the dowry rate, in fact, it goes opposite. It becomes reverse. And getting a girl or buying a girl from the community becomes very difficult for them. There is a community in Haryana called Mewati where they say that, and there is a culture called Paro culture, where the girls are bought from far off places like Northeast, they are bought from Kerala, they are bought from any other places. And young girls, this is also promoting child marriages because the girls are sent by the parents because they cannot rear them and they cannot, nurture them. So they feel that the better early the girl goes from house, home, so it is better for them. So like, that is how it is sold. And we have many cases in particularly in Hyderabad, where the Gulf people coming from the Gulf, they buy the girls and like, shakes, and they just take the girl out. So these type of like, bride trafficking is quite prevalent, but again, not much understood, or not but much work done on in this field. There have been cases in Madhya Pradesh also, where, and very recently also it happened, where the girls are very, systematically trained in different culture. One of the girl who was rescued, so she was being trained in Jain culture, because like, in the Jain community, again, there was a skewed sex ratio. So there was one placement agency, I would call it placement agency, or, one trafficking network, where they used to take the girls, train them in that particular Jain culture, and sell them in the name of being Jains. So that is also what was happening. This is also like, a part of a bride trafficking. In Western countries, I mean, if you leave just India and Western countries, there are many sites where they just go and, from USA, they buy the ladies or buy the girls from Philippines, Vietnam, and they are brought like, after marriage, but here they are being exploited. So bride trafficking, again, is one important aspect of commercial sexual exploitation of a child. But unfortunately, this not being very much known, understood, so not much action is being taken on this. Another fast developing and now becoming a huge, like, money spinner is pornography. In pornography, what the traffickers, like, find it to be the safest thing. Why safest? Because they think that they don't even need to go to any place, take the girl out of that place. They just contact the parents. They just try to, through some trafficker, they would reach their place, and everything is shot at their place. They create a studio there at their place, and they do the shooting there. So pornography has become a, like, as we tell that it's a multi-crore business now, pornography. States have been taking very important, like, I would say that actions. They take very strong actions against pornography. IT departments, they have been trying to block all sort of pornography, but still darknet and other places are there where it is easily sold. And the reporting on pornography is very less. It's very difficult to find out, as I said, because there is no movement at all. And there is no movement. And second is the family is involved many a times, unless and until the girl is, like, taken and trafficked from one place to another, moved. And there, if they are exploited, then there may be a case, if the parents are not paying, there may be a case of missing child. But in many cases in pornography, there is no need even to take the child outside. So that is another problem. Even in Western countries, they say that, Vietnamese, Philippines, it's doing roaring business there, pornography. Then the entertainment. Entertainment, again, is a very important, a part of sex trafficking. In India, when there was, though there is a lot of debate, it always goes on if, dance bars was right or wrong. Was it right? Right and wrong. And second is if it was the right of the person just to manifest their skills of dancing. So, but there are, there were an n number of cases where in dance balls the girls dancing were less than 18 years old. A lot of this Bedia Bachara community, from Madhya Pradesh, were being recruited to dance in dance bars in Mumbai. And so this becomes, again, one of the ways of exploitation. So subtly it is done, discreetly it is done. On face value, if you see, you find that only the girl is dancing, but actually it doesn't happen. So let us talk about another dance which happens in this Bedia community, as I was talking about this DNT tribes in community-based sexual exploitation. They used to have a folk dance called Rai dance. And it was a very popular folk dance. And even during the religious programs, they used to go and dance. And there is again a religious program happening in Guna. Guna is a district in Madhya Pradesh. So where there is a temple where if anybody asks for anything and if it is fulfilled, what we call is mannat, then the person who has asked for that mannat is fulfilled, go to that temple, and the first thing to happen in the temple is that there should be a Rai dance, particularly for that. So what they do is, and thousands of people come there. So all of them keep on hiring, this Bedia community dancers to perform, and that is considered to be a service to the god. So it used to be a folk dance, a very good folk dance meant for religious and other occasions, but now it has got distorted. Now the whole Rai dance has become a vulgar dance, seductive dance, and so the people are hired. I mean, and many, not many kids, children below 18 years, when they are adolescent or when they are growing, so the teenagers, they are hired for dance. And then many a times, at the end of the dance session, which ends at around 12, 1 o'clock, and in the villages or at any place, and the people who are watching it, because it has become selective dance, are all youngsters or people and middle-aged, and they drink, and then the girls are exploited. And there have been so many cases happening. So if we understand, if we see this from now, if we again start look into all these aspects of the dimensions or the sub-classifications of this dimension of commercial sexual exploitation, we'll see that the approach of the law enforcer has to be different at each place. Like if it is happening in brothel, it has to be different because a person has been brought here and continuously, caged and exploited. But at the same time, in community-based sexual exploitation, the child is free to move. But because they are in a community, supported by the community, and sanctioned, socially sanctioned by the community, as also by the neighboring community, they do not consider it to be their victimization. The child doesn't feel that they are being victimized, or they are they have been trafficked, or they are being exploited. So that concept is not there. So if the law enforcer goes there and tries to implement ITPA, which is Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, so in that condition, if we use the sections, then the whole village where this Bedia community is, or Bachara community is, who are into prostitution, as per the sections, any person living on the earnings of a sex worker, or any person who is soliciting in public, they are offenders. So in that case, because everyone lives on the community, the earnings of these girls, and even they are soliciting in public place, because every village has either a temple or a school, and as per the public place definition, any temple, any school, or any public government offices within the within 100 meters of that particular place, if there it is a person is soliciting a customer, then it is crime. So this happens in villages. So the whole village is going to be converted into a prison. So here, how do we address and how do we apply it by Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act is important. The way we work in brothels, the same way you cannot work in community-based sexual exploitation, that we have to understand, because it is so normalized. They don't even think about being victimized. Sex tourism, similarly, it's altogether different. Sex tourism is ephemeral. It's not necessarily that a person who is trafficked is continuously under the control of a trafficker. This doesn't happen here. So the approach towards sex tourism has to be different. Similarly, bride trafficking, as I said, many a times in it has been found in Paro cases that a young girl who has been trafficked, bought by the community, they are being exploited by all male members in the family. But when it comes for getting a next girl, you would be surprised to know that the girl who has been victimized becomes a conduit, or she herself would go into the villages and try to scout for a next bride for the family. So that is a Stockholm syndrome which works here. So here again, your approach has to be altogether different. So we need to understand the dimensions and how it works, the socio-cultural dynamics. If you don't understand it, so and if you try to use the broom, one broom in all rooms of the house, it won't work. So that is why it is necessary that we understand these dimensions. Similarly, pornography, as I told you, it has to be altogether different approach here, and in entertainment. So that is what is important for us to understand, that it is not very simple. It is not, the way just saying sex trafficking doesn't mean that it is trafficking means a girl is brought to a brothel and exploited there. So sex trafficking is a very, very general term that we use, but it should not be used. I mean, generalizing a term is like, doing more harm than doing good. And another aspect or concept which is being used nowadays and very popular is what do you call it, modern day slavery. So this is one term which is being used internationally and particularly by the Westerners, modern day slavery. So when I was in USA, just to share a story with you. So when I was in USA and there was a case of similar case of sex trafficking. So I was in a police station doing my affiliation. So I told a police officer that, okay, this case that you're talking about is a sex trafficking case. And immediately what the response, or I would say that what the reaction was, the officer said, do you think it's a case of slavery? There is no physical abuse used here. So how do you say slavery? So when you use this word slavery, what comes into your mind is that a victim has to be chained, the victim has to be brutally assaulted. So that is what the image comes into your mind. So for all the practitioners or law enforcers or policymakers, it is very important we understand the different aspects or the dimensions of human trafficking. Next, please. So how do we combat that? That is very important. Talking about sex trafficking is fine, but we need to find a solution as well. If it is so gory, then is there a way that we can control, or is there a way that we can basically eradicate sex trafficking, particularly of child? So it is possible, but we need to be very aggressive in that. First thing, what needs to be understood, and what globally has been misunderstood, I would say that, is that human trafficking is a problem of criminal justice system. And that is so because more of our effort has been reactionary effort. Reactionary effort means we rescue people. And when we rescue people, then on we start everything. It's a reverse process that we do. So that is why, because the rescue is done by criminal justice system, so it is presumed that it is the role of the criminal justice system, means the police, law enforcer has to ensure that a person is rescued. But believe me, trafficking, as I said, only those people are trafficked who are vulnerable. And the vulnerability of a person is caused because of the failure of social justice system, not because of the failure of criminal justice system. And if at all the criminal justice system has also failed, we need to understand that criminal justice system is a part of social justice system. It has stemmed out from social justice system. So basically, it is the social justice system. So how do we do that? One is prevention. We know what makes the person vulnerable. It could be the push and pull factors. And push and pull factors would be socio, cultural, economic, political, all those factors which can play a role at that point. So prevention, when we talk about prevention, there are two types of prevention we have to work on. One is a proactive prevention. Proactive prevention means to just ensure that a child is not victimized at the first, at the onset. I mean, the support system should be so strong, the protective net should be so good that they are unable, the traffickers are unable to recruit the child. That is proactive thing. But second is, what now we do is, when we rescue them, then there has to be a reactive prevention. Reactive prevention means when they are reintegrated or rehabilitated, then to ensure that they are not re-victimized. When I was talking to one of the judges in, there in Mumbai, because there is a ITPA code, that is perhaps the only ITPA code, Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act code in India, which is exclusively dealing with the ITPA cases. So when I was talking to one of the judges there, the judge who was heading it, so she told me that, there are so many people whom we rescue, whom we reintegrate, again come back after again being rescued. So when she asked them, how do you again fall into the trap of the trafficker? They said it is just because the situation which made us vulnerable earlier hasn't changed there. So the same vulnerability exists. So if the same vulnerability exists, then again we are vulnerable, and the trafficker comes, pounces on us, and we feel that it is better to stay in brothel rather than coming back and getting there. Particularly in cases of sex trafficking, the stigma is so strong. Any person falling into the trap of sex trafficking, they won't be accepted or assimilated in the society again. So reactive prevention is again very important. Proactive is good, but once you rescue them, do we create an atmosphere where we ensure that there is no, what you call it, re-victimization or re-trafficking? So that is very important. Second is protection. Protection again is very, very important to understand. Protection is like, when we rescue, I mean, when the kids are rescued from any place. So in that stage or in that place, how do we provide them shelter, and how good the shelter is, how good the counseling is, that they are, one, they come out of the trauma. Because child who is trafficked is a victim, she would be, or he would be, even if it's a boy. So they go through a tremendous trauma, unbelievable trauma, which perhaps in the next session, on 28, 29, it would be talked about the the situation of a child. So how do we take them out of that trauma? That is important for the protection stage, because once it is done, then it would be easy for us to, I would say that, prosecute the offenders, even to get the details of the offenders, even to break the network. As I said, it's an organized crime. When we say organized crime, from the rescue point to the origin point, there is a chain, and that chain has to be exposed, that has to be unearthed, again, which is not being done when they are rescued. It would be only possible if the victim who is rescued is free enough to speak, is confident enough to speak. The trust deficit which has developed over, after being trafficked or before being trafficked, if it is a push factor, then that is somehow that trust deficit is bridged. So that is the role of the protection. But are we good enough? I mean, do we have a good shelter home where they feel confident? Is there a concept of counseling them? So that is one thing which is missing. So we have to strengthen that as well. And the third is prosecution. Prosecution here, actually where the criminal justice system's role is maximum. Otherwise, in the protection and the prevention stage, so the more important role is that of the other stakeholders of the social justice system, and the role of the criminal justice system or the law enforcement is very less here. But in prosecution, it is a total role of a criminal justice system. So, but unless and until the protection is strong, if we do not instill that confidence in the victim, the prosecution would literally fail. And particularly in cases of children, it is very, very difficult. The way we are, the law enforcers ask questions. I being a police officer, I'm telling you, the way we ask the questions, we are so naive. I mean, it's very difficult. We don't even differentiate if you're talking to a kid or if you're talking to an adult. I mean, we think that, getting information from them is throw direct questions and just, and grab it and we will do it. It doesn't work that way, even with the adults. So forget about the kids. So the children has to be dealt very, very delicately. And how would everything happen? I mean, how this prevention, protection, prosecution would happen? It is not role of one agency. You have to synergize the role of all the stakeholders. And how it is done? It is done through participation. So how do we participate? What are the other agencies which needs to participate in, strengthening prevention, protection, and prosecution mechanism? Next, please. So here the role of all these stakeholders come into play. The role of CBOs, NGOs is very important. We need to identify those CBOs, NGOs who are working in this field. They have to equip themselves, and besides equipping themselves, they have to have people, right people, and guide even the law enforcers when required, or in fact, they should be co-opted by the law enforcers or other stakeholders, because CBOs, NGOs can specialize in these areas. Police, normally, because more of our action is reactionary action, so certainly they are the first respondents. CBOs, NGOs, and the police are first respondents. Sometimes the CBOs initiate the rescue operations and they take the assistance of the police. So police and CBOs and NGOs becomes the first respondents in rescuing the kids, or I would say that in figuring out and finding out where they are being exploited. But the role of the individuals is very important, because when we say who is vulnerable, a neighbor or a person who is next, living next door, can easily identify that this person is vulnerable, or at least if they do not identify, They can create a support system, these individuals, and through individual, a community can create a support system where they ensure that that social support system that we talk about, or the security net or protection net that we are talking about, is created. You cannot always bank on the government or the state to provide that protection net. It is the role of the community, the role of an individual who is doing it. And when I talk about individual, even the individual means the kids. I will give you an example that when I was in Minneapolis as a Humphrey Fellow, so we were discussing a case in a school. So one of the teachers got up. I was talking about human trafficking, though they did not want to directly talk about human trafficking, in particular sex trafficking in schools. But I was having a discussion with the management there. So we were trying to introduce trafficking in their curriculum in Minneapolis and in Minnesota. So, when we were doing it, I was having a discussion. So one teacher said that, let me tell you one, story that how important it is. They said one of the, student in one of these schools. So she heard about this, what trafficking is, how a trafficker approaches. So, and it was very fresh in her mind. So when she went to airport to board a flight and she was going somewhere, and a young girl, 15, 16-year-old girl, so, she's good enough to travel there. So when she was there, a trafficker approached her at the airport and tried to entice her. So immediately it stuck into her mind what was taught in the school or what was discussed in the school. So she alerted the police. And the moment she alerted the police, the trafficker somehow escaped. So that is how she saved her life. So even, disseminating information about what trafficking is very important amongst all, even among the kid, so that they can also, participate, be a stakeholder in saving themselves. So the role of individual community is important, and government, of course, we need to have good policies, and we need to ensure that whatever we are talking about, the social justice system, main role is of the government, though they need to encourage participation of other stakeholders, but they have to have good policies, they have to have good laws to ensure that this does not happen. So what normally we do is sometimes, as I said, the laws like ITPA, Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act. How can we, the worst part is when a law enforcer is given some scope to interpret a law. If it is given, there are fair chances of misuse and abuse. So this is what happens, if they are given a freedom that if ITPA, Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, has to be applied amongst these communities like Bedia, Bachra, or they should not. If that freedom is given to them, then certainly it's going to create more danger and more vulnerability than actually serving the purpose. So laws has to be again revisited. It has to be seen how to address the problem. And if it is because India is a big country, so if there's some scope should be given in the rules for them to, for the states to work on that. And if proper orientation is done of those people who are framing laws and policies. So this is what the participation, how the participation has to be done, which is going to strengthen to combat trafficking, and those three, what we talked about in earlier slide. Next, please. So what are the major blockades? Why it is not happening? If we know that these are here the solution lies, so why it is not happening? First, there is lack of conceptual literacy. As I said, if you talk about human trafficking, and I have been talking about human trafficking for more than 15 years now, and unfortunately, even the law enforcers or policymakers or any, many people. So I find that hardly 5 to 10% of the people would understand trafficking from this perspective. For them, everything is generalized. So if you don't have the conceptual literacy, then certainly your action or your efforts would be minimized. So it won't leave an impact, it won't be effective. So we need to spread conceptual literacy. We need to know people that what exactly human trafficking is. And here we are just talking about sex trafficking, child sex trafficking. Just imagine there are so many other dimensions. Child is not just trafficked for sex, for labor, for organ transplant, for many, for even medical trafficking. So the conceptual literacy is very important. Second is antagonistic mindset. Let me give an example, what happens in the mind of the law enforcers. If a girl goes missing, then it is presumed that the girl has eloped. It's a normal mindset. And if the boy has gone missing, so then it is thought that he had a fight at his place, or is dissatisfied or frustrated of the conditions where he is living, so he has ran away. So the cases are like of runaway. Either, as for the girls it is elopement, or for the boy it is because of that. That is why Supreme Court was so strict in that when giving a verdict in 7512 PIL or writ petition, and said that all cases of missing child should be registered, and in 4 months if a child is not found, it should be transferred to anti-human trafficking unit. But does it happen? Had it been happening, so the number of missing children still as being reported in their statistics or in their data, or as we call it, National Crime Record Bureau, so National Crime Records, so many equal number of cases should have been converted into trafficking cases. But is it so? So that is why that antagonistic mindset that we have about children or about the trafficking is one thing which is preventing or stopping the law enforcers from registering cases or going all out thinking that it is a case of human trafficking. Official complicity, it is a global problem, and trafficking, as it is an organized crime involving a lot of money, certainly there would be some officers who would work hand in glove with the traffickers and create an atmosphere which somehow is conducive for the traffickers to work on. So official complicity certainly is there, and it is not just here in India or in particularly in some states. It's a global problem. That is why it is so difficult for human trafficking to be stopped. And confusing laws, again, that is very important. Confusing laws, because if you see that similar, the labor law would say something about children, the POCSO will say something about children, 370 would talk about something else. The law enforcers get so confused about it that they won't understand which sections has to be applied for a particular case. So that is again a big problem. So that is why a fresh, a human trafficking bill is being placed, so that there is one comprehensive law which would cover all types of human trafficking. So this is happening, and this is one good step which is happening. Next, please. So the law of belief says whatever you believe with conviction becomes your reality. So let us start believing that human trafficking is reality. The child sex trafficking is reality. Maybe it is happening next door. Maybe it is happening with the neighbors. Maybe our kids are vulnerable to be trafficked. As I told you, poverty is not the reason for trafficking. It is not the only reason for trafficking. Vulnerability is trafficking. So let us start believing in the fact that it can happen to anyone, anybody is scared. So with conviction, we have to work towards stopping child sex trafficking. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Virendraji. Thank you very much for this very robust framework that you have presented. I want to highlight a couple of things that you said and use that to predicate some of the questions that have come up and some other questions that are very central to the thesis that you presented. Traffickers are very smart and organized. Therefore, the anti-trafficking movement is not equally smart and organized. You can do the math. The inroads of brothel spaces are soulless. Oh my gosh, Virendraji. The inroads of brothel spaces are soulless. If a child is abducted for whatever reason, all the lynching that takes place but if a child is sold with complicity of the family and what you refer to as the trust deficit, and the difference that you have made between sexual exploitation for profit, where the child may not travel or be trafficked, but still constitute sexual exploitation, to be seen against sexual rights of adults versus children in the context of vulnerability. And in child sexual abuse, the same phenomena as grooming. How does a perpetrator, a trafficker, recognize that a child is vulnerable and target that child? Adults may have autonomy of choice, but for children in vulnerable circumstances, this becomes very difficult. And therefore, the importance of missing children and the failure of the social justice system that you have alluded to. You have addressed many questions in relation to how to stop this crime and how to effectively curb it, which are questions that came up on chat by the prevention and the promotion model that you spoke about, including the example that you gave about the girl in the airport who remembered what had been taught. But what can be done, Virendraji, to make children aware and protect children from child trafficking?
Thank you. I was expecting this question. So, first thing is we have to reach out to children. One, straight away, you cannot scare them by saying that they are very vulnerable and they can be trafficked. This is not to be done. So our approach has to be very smart. Tell them how a trafficker, if we don't use a trafficker word, but how they can be approached, how somebody can exploit a situation or a position, and how they can safeguard themselves. And if at all that situation comes, whom to approach and how to save themselves. So this is one thing has to be done. For that, what I feel is, personally, I feel is just me, you, or anybody our people who are sitting here and hearing us and posing questions to us. So everyone has to be an ambassador here. It has to reach to each doorstep. If we do not engage with every member of the community, then the vulnerability will be exploited. They won't understand it. A simple, again, another question, because we didn't talk about it, but let me tell you, about the forced labor. When we see that, kids are being moved from one place to another, from tribal areas, from other places as domestic help in urban places or metropolitan cities. There is a study which says that 60% of the children who are brought for forced labor are sexually exploited. There have been organizations which have worked in Delhi, and they have found that the girls are basically trapped from not reporting because they are sexually exploited, and told that when you go back, we would tell everybody that you have been part of sex network. So right. You will be stigmatized, and when you go back home, you won't be received by them. So these kids are so I would say that the child mind, they get so scared, they don't even report, and continuously they fall into the trap of this trafficking. So that is why it has to be told to everyone. Everybody should know what are the dimensions of trafficking, what exactly trafficking is. That is the only solution. All stakeholders have to play their role.
Dr. Mishra, your thoughts on the pandemic and how this has affected child trafficking?
Yeah, I remember that I was doing a session on during the pandemic, when there was pandemic. So there were two school of thoughts. One school of thought said that with the pandemic, the trafficking has gone low, and particularly the sex trafficking has gone low. Even the forced labor has gone low because because of this fear, the customers are not coming to them. So even if they are trafficked, but they're not finding customers. But at the same time, there is another school of thought which said because people were stuck at places, so their mental health was being challenged. So it became very easy for them to produce the girls to them and getting exploited. So one school of thought says that it has increased phenomenally during the pandemic time. But there hasn't been any study as such, still needs to be done.
On the subject of customers, Dr. Mishra, can customers be arrested and prosecuted under the anti-trafficking laws? And why don't the police ever arrest customers who visit brothels?
They are. ITPA do criminalize them. So they are, because, buying, that is one interesting thing about the ITPA. Prostitution per se is not criminalized there in the definition. But you won't find in there anyway saying that the prostitution is criminal, a crime. But it says that soliciting in public places is crime, living on the earnings of this thing is crime, and buying sex is crime.
Right. No, I mean, this actually relates to a question, a comment that has come on YouTube chat, that don't you think that our corrupt systems are mostly responsible for increasing such types of crimes? So you spoke about the social justice system and the criminal justice system and other related that. Your thoughts, Dr. Mishra?
Whenever we talk about corruption, I say that a person takes money only when there is a person to give money. So when I say an officer is corrupt, I would say that even the citizen is corrupt. So, and these officers come from the community. So that ailment is there existing in the community. So we have to correct that community. First, we have to, just हम लोग बोलते हैं कि we have to look into our own गिरेबान first before pointing out. So corruption in the system is there because we give them space to be corrupt.
Right. Since the COVID and the entire preoccupation with the whole digital world, and the National Commission also looking at online safety and digital safety and all that, there is some thought that online platforms are being misused to recruit children for sex trafficking. So the question is, can the cyber cell do anything about this, and what can we do to protect children from this when so many children are online these days?
Very true. I mean, one-to-one, it is very difficult if they are recruited, but I mean, because as you know, very recently I was in Hyderabad in National Police Academy. So in one of the in series of discussions on cybercrime, so that is what was told to me, that in each state there are cells being created. Nationally, the cell is very, a robust cell is operating. And now we are like, I mean, in our country, so a lot of things are happening. So we can say that there is a bright future in this field. I mean, the government is very strict about it and strongly working on this issue.
I remember that you referred to the only IPTA court being in Mumbai. This is a question on IPTA. Does IPTA apply to boys and male victims of trafficking?
I think it would apply to ITPA. No, ITPA is exclusively for girls, for women, basically. It is not for children. Means not for children means it is only for females.
So okay, I understand that. So related to that, when rescues are conducted and the girls/women claim that they're doing it out of choice, it is sometimes difficult to prove whether the victim is an adult or a child. And what do you think is the solution for this as a police officer?
See, I mean, to figure out if the person is child, there are scientific ways of doing that. But after rescue, for the victim to say that, okay, they have been victimized and they would like to somehow help the law enforcers or the criminal justice system in identifying the offenders, here the role of the protection comes. That is important, what I was talking about. Very, very smartly we have to approach them. So that thing normally is missing in our system. We don't know exactly how to deal with kids. We don't have those specialized units who should take special efforts to take the children into confidence, ensure that they can get out of the trauma first. Their trauma is first dealt with before rather than getting straight away a statement. So these are few things which we need to understand. I think there is huge gap in this particular field. I can't hear you, sir. I can't hear you.
So we spoke about this whole situation. To delve into this a little more minutely, so where customers are concerned, do you think prosecuting customers would help decreasing trafficking, or just drive it further underground and make children more vulnerable? How do you figure this out?
I mean, I couldn't get the question.
Do you think that prosecuting customers would help in decreasing trafficking, or would it drive it further underground and make children more vulnerable?
See, I mean, that is again a very interesting question. So how much prosecution is a deterrent factor? So basically it is talking about the demand and supply. See, this demand would never decrease. That is one debate which is still going on, if we should focus on demand or if we should focus on supply. As we say that there are three vices which have existed since time immemorial, since civilization. One is prostitution, second is gambling, and third is consumption of liquor, alcohol. You cannot eradicate these three things. It has these vices, even when you read this, even Arthashastra, they have talked about it. So any document you read, the oldest documents, they talk about these things being, happening in society. So, but demand if you prosecute one, like as we say that, even, after Nirbhaya case, the hype that it created, it was presumed that it is going to somehow deter the other rapist. But they say that every month or every year, there are, scores of Nirbhaya cases happening. So that is like, a very difficult to say that if this would happen, I mean, that would stop or deter some way trafficking, because the demand would exist, but the demand would remain. But certainly, when an action is taken on some, network, in one network, the channel they would change the channel. They would somehow move in a different direction. If a brothel is running here, or if something is happening in one place, they may change the place. So that is why I say that it is very important that we unearth the whole chain, right? Because it is an organized crime. It is not one person involvement. So when we rescue a person, or when a customer, whatever, a person is found at one place, at destination, then we should try to thread the whole network and reach up to the origin point. Then only, we will be able to somehow stop it. Because if one organization, organized network is broken, the chain is broken, then it becomes little difficult for them to reestablish it.
You've raised a very interesting issue about the whole gender conundrum as far as the demand issue is concerned, about the whole construction of entitlement and masculinity. And is there a scope there to actually work with boys in schools and their sensitization on the whole issue of entitlement, particularly sexual entitlement, to a more egalitarian form of choices in human relationships? That, as a final question, Dr. Mishra, related to the whole gender conundrum, you refer to bride trafficking. Is this becoming worse because of, let's say, the declining sex ratio in India? Are there studies or statistics about this problem? Because you mentioned people being trafficked from Kerala and the Northeast for this particular reason, presumably because of the declining sex ratio. Any thoughts on this, Dr. Mishra?
What I feel is maybe it must have been happening earlier also, because this aspect of trafficking was not understood earlier. So that is why maybe the information was not coming to us. But certainly, the cases are increasing. And more and more we get into it, we are finding that because of the skewed sex ratio, I mean, many communities are taking girls from other places. So there is increase in that.
Dr. Mishra, any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us before we meet you again tomorrow for the Hindi version of the same presentation? Your last thoughts, Dr. Mishra.
Just that everyone here has to be an ambassador of anti-human trafficking. So as organized, these guys, the traffickers, have organized and created a network. We have to create our own network. We have to spread across the country, join hands, and let everyone know what trafficking is and reduce the vulnerability as much as possible. Start in your neighborhood, and I'm telling you, it is going to change the scenario.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mishra. It would encourage and interest you to know that over 1,000 people have logged in to your wonderful session to give us this perspective. Friends, a Hindi version of the same presentation will be there tomorrow, and on 28th, 29th, we look at psychosocial and mental health issues. And then later, the third part of the series, we speak about conviction rates and some of the legal and policy issues. On behalf of SAMVAD, Dr. Mishra, bahut bahut dhanyavad. Thank you very much for sharing your valuable time, and we'll be in touch with you. Good night, friends. Be safe and be healthy. And we hope to see many of you tomorrow for the Hindi version as well. But please remember, for the sessions on mental health and psychosocial impact on 28th and 29th of October. Good night.
Thank you so much. Good night.